So are you or someone that you know thinking about getting a pet reptile like this cute ball python right here? Well, stick around because what I'm going to be going over today is the cost of owning a reptile as well as what it's like to owning a reptile. So stick around. My name is Nick Pulaski. Growing up, I have always had a passion for wildlife, and with that passion, along with my passion of filmmaking, I get taken on some amazing adventures creating wildlife content, getting up close with a variety of incredible animals. So come follow along as I pursue my goals of educating, inspiring, exploring, and conserving wildlife, all while having fun, seeing the beauty in our natural world. Alright, so hello and welcome back. So today what we're doing is we're going over exactly what are some of the costs and what exactly is it like owning a pet reptile for a first-time keeper. So if you're someone that's just starting into reptiles, just getting into it, don't have any reptiles whatsoever, or you just have a couple reptiles and you're just kind of wanting to learn a little bit more of what it's like keeping a whole bunch of different species of reptiles, I think this is the perfect video that's going to be for you. In terms of care, reptiles are totally different than what a dog and a cat would be. You are looking into a longer commitment for some in some cases, as well as you're looking at a whole bunch of different care requirements that you're not going to see with a dog or a cat. So a lot of people, probably like you too, you've probably gone to like a pet store or you've probably gone to a reptile show, you've probably just seen even pictures online or videos online like you're seeing right now, and you're probably wondering like, you know, these animals look really stunning, like this banana leopard pied ball python right here. He is just an amazing animal, and ball pythons are a really popular animal in the reptile pet trade. And the reason being is because of their care requirements and everything that goes along with them in terms of their temperament, everything. As you can see throughout this beginning part of the video, I mean, he's just totally chilling out right here. He's relaxed right now with me. He's just, I kind of woke him up for a nap, so he's a little bit probably grumpy right now, but he's totally fine with me and totally relaxed. And that's a lot what people enjoy, is having an animal that can be completely relaxed around them and having something that's a reptile that can come in a whole bunch of different beautiful colorations like this guy right here. And no wonder these guys are so popular in the pet trade. I'm going to kind of go into a different video in terms of ball pythons down the line. I'm going to be more so talking about in this video reptiles as a whole. But in terms of like a gateway for a lot of people, ball pythons are where people normally begin. And that's no wonder because of all the things that I simply put just right there and then. So the first thing I would say that you want to kind of go over and ask yourself is, have you done enough research for this animal? It's kind of more different than doing some window shopping and kind of looking at pictures and a brief summary of the animal. I'm talking about in-depth research on the animal you're thinking about getting. Because every single animal that you get in terms of a reptile or really whatever animal that you get has a different care requirement. So with that care requirement, you want to know if that fits in your lifestyle. So if you're a traveler, you're going to probably want something that requires a little bit less attention to it. Now, I'm not saying it's a neglect case whatsoever. So for example, a snake is going to want to eat every 7 to 10 days of its life. So if you feed a snake and then you go out of town for a few days, that is going to be totally fine for the animal. You don't have to worry about it. Obviously, you want to make sure that it has fresh water and fresh bedding and everything like that as well too, but you don't have to worry about continuously feeding that thing daily. And that would be something that would be more possibly ideal for you. If you're someone that's kind of more of a homebody, especially during these times right now, if you're someone that's more so home and you're thinking it's going to be more of a permanent solution for you, maybe you can get into something that's a little bit more hands-on and something that you can kind of interact a little bit more on the daily and requires a little bit more. That may be something that you may want to look into as well. It just kind of depends on that. I would say doing your research on the animal, seeing if you can fit into what its care requirements are, as well as if it can fit into your lifestyle too. It's kind of a puzzle that you kind of mesh together and you have to see if it works out. If it doesn't, maybe it's not for you. Now, I know some people could have their heart set on wanting to work with a certain animal, and I know personally I can relate to something like that because I have been there. For example, I've always wanted to work with bigger snakes like Burmese pythons and everything, but the care requirement for those, they require a whole bunch more space than I was able to provide or anything like that, and it just wasn't going to work out for me. So ball pythons were a little bit more of a easier solution for me because they don't get as big, they don't get 9+ foot like a Burmese python would. So for the temporary solution before I moved, that was what I had to work with. So before I moved, ball pythons along with some other species that I could manage were the animals that I worked with before I could get into other dream species that I wanted to work with that I wasn't able to just at the time. But it's something that you kind of have to graduate up to throughout your life, and some people, that's something that it requires a lot of patience at the end of the day, and that can suck. But I mean, I think that's something that it just takes time with these guys. And I think that's another thing that may need to be looked over too while you're doing your research is not saying you need to do like a week's worth of research and then you're a professional on it. Research, the care, everything is always evolving. So you want to constantly be staying up to date on care for your animal because the research is ever changing for care requirements and things to ever benefit your animal. So definitely something you also want to look into for that as well. So this is going to sound funny for you guys, but reptiles are kind of like pieces of candy or like tattoos, for example. Normally people just don't get one. They get a whole bunch of them down the line gradually. And I can vouch for that, obviously. I started with just a simple garter snake when I was growing up, and then that kind of led into getting into corn snakes, and then getting into geckos, and then getting into ball pythons, and then ball pythons becoming a big collection, and then breeding ball pythons, and then getting into womas and tortoises and chameleons and everything like that. My story may be a little bit different than some, obviously, but this is something that's been a true passion. I've always been into reptiles, I've always been into animals, so I knew that this was something that I could take on and that I could work with and that I wanted to work with, and I knew it was going to be a long commitment for me. For some people, they'll get one snake and then they'll be like, you know what, I want to get maybe 2 more snakes, or if they want to get more geckos or tortoises or anything, or turtles, doesn't matter. It would be one of those gateways for some people. And that's just kind of a warning I have for some people. They are really, really popular pets, especially in our ever-changing ongoing world and where we're always on a fast pace and everything like that. Reptiles are something that, though they have a lot of care requirements, can be something that's a little bit more independent at times too versus a dog or a cat. So over the past years, that's kind of why they've been gaining in popularity. Now, the thing I want to go over right now is the costs. And that's going to be something that you have to really consider as well too. Research is one thing, but knowing what you're getting into and the commitment that it beholds, that's a whole other animal too that you need to dig deeper into as you're researching. So research is the umbrella for all these things right here. Now when you get into an animal, the animal normally is only part of the purchase, and normally it's only a fraction of what the actual purchase cost would be. You have to think, you're also getting into the food, you're also getting into, for example, for reptiles, you're getting into the lighting aspect and the heating aspect, you're also getting into different decorations, shelters, the enclosure, bedding, everything like that. There's a whole bunch of different things that you want to be prepared for, because when you ring out at the end of the day, you're going to be paying for, yes, the animal, but you're probably going to be paying a lot more in terms of care costs for the animal. And some of those care costs are a one-off, but some of those care costs you have to gradually say, if the animal's getting bigger, you need to get a bigger size enclosure. Where are you going off to? So in terms of care costs, you're going to want to make sure that you're prepared for those care costs, because when you ring out, you want to make sure that 1, you can afford it, and 2, that you're able to take on the commitment. So the commitment is more than just the animal at the end of the day. You also want to make sure you're maintaining with the lighting and everything like that. So for example, if your animal needs UVB bulbs, you need to make sure that you're changing those bulbs normally every 6 months. Because normally after 6 months, the UVB is not as strong as it once was. So make sure you're also considering those things. So if you're getting into the breakdown of the care costs, I would say the first thing you want to think of is the food source. So the food source is going to be one of those not one-time costs, where it's going to be something that you're going to have to constantly get into and you're going to want to think of. And it's not just the costs that I would think of, but also too, are you comfortable with feeding these reptiles? Because not all these reptiles eat is vegetables or anything like that. Normally, like for example, a snake, they're going to take mice, rodents, what have you. So sometimes you have to consider, for example, I feed frozen thawed. So are you comfortable with getting in bulk sometimes frozen rodents to keep in a freezer somewhere and store them somewhere? Or are you comfortable constantly going out to get frozen rodents, or if constantly getting a food source for your animal, what have you? Some are bugs, for example. Are you comfortable with that in general? And that's going to be continuous cost. So are you comfortable paying that continuous cost for feeders for your reptile? Same with like vegetables and everything like that too. So are you comfortable with paying for the continuous costs for the reptiles to have whatever fruits and vegetables that they require as well too for the diet? So another thing you may have to look into is a vitamin and a supplement for your reptiles. So you want to make sure that 1, you're giving them the proper vitamins and supplements that they need whenever they need it, as well as if you're able to acquire it and if you're able to afford the costs of continuously giving those, as well as continuously giving those just on top of their food in general too. Sometimes that's something that people forget. Sometimes people don't really want to go into all this prep work. They just kind of want to throw something in there and call it a day. And sometimes it's not just that easy. So are you capable and are you willing to take on that responsibility? And then the next thing I would say is the enclosure. So like, for example, a lot of people will get a smaller enclosure to start with for a ball python so they don't stress out, and then they're probably going to require something a little bit bigger down the line. Same with like my tortoise or anything like that, where they're in a temporary baby enclosure until they get into a bigger stage of their life. Are you able to take on a bigger enclosure for your animal and potentially have to buy 2 enclosures down the line, starting with a baby enclosure and then working up to a bigger enclosure? Not only in terms of cost, sometimes that can be a lot, but also too, are you able to house that size of enclosure for whatever reptile you're getting into? Like iguanas, for example, they don't stay super small for long. A lot of people, and this is a common occurrence where they end up in rescues, where a lot of people get them super small, where they realize they can't take on this 6+ foot iguana down the line. And it's one of those heartbreaking things where you see these animals all beaten up and all in bad cases and everything like that, where they're not being properly cared for because of those reasons. So definitely something you want to consider when getting into reptiles is, are you able to not only pay for the enclosure that's proper for the animal for the time of its life that it needs to be in it, but are you also able to house that down the line too? And I kind of brushed over this earlier, but I'm kind of going to go into it in general too. But like the cost of the heat lamps and the lighting that you would require as well too, you want to make sure you're changing those out. The bulbs are going to be the obvious things that are going to constantly need to be changed out. The fixtures not as often. Fixtures normally I don't have to run through as often. They normally are pretty structurally sound. Like I said, for UVB you have to change that bulb every 6 months. For heating, whenever that goes out, you want to make sure you're changing that as well too. So those are added costs. So you want to make sure you do have a fund to be ready for those random sprung upon costs. And in terms of random sprung upon costs, that's kind of what I want to get into next is, for example, vets. So vets and reptile vets and exotic vets in general, you want to make sure you have a good reptile vet that you can go to whenever you have an issue, if you have an issue for your reptile in general that's nearby. Because you want to make sure that you have one that you can go to if something good does occur for your reptile. It's one of those things where it does suck if those things happen, but I mean, like any other animal or anything like us, we have to go to the doctor when we are sick, and they are no different. They are still a life that we do need to take care of and make sure that they get the proper care that they need. So not only do you want to make sure that you have a reputable exotic vet that you can go to whenever you need to, but you also want to make sure you also have a rainy day fund, as I call it, or emergency fund, as I call it too, that if something does go wrong, you have the funds to do something about it. And exotic vets normally aren't cheap, so you also want to make sure that you're comfortable enough to be able to pay that reptile vet if you need to. So in general, as a whole, I'm going to say that there's going to be weekly costs, there's going to be monthly costs, and there's going to be yearly costs for your reptiles as a whole. So I want you guys to be sure that you're prepared to make that commitment down the line. And I just thought of this too, actually, and in another video I'll probably go more in depth on this, but you also want to make sure that whoever you're living with is comfortable with you getting into reptiles and getting into another pet in general, I would say, because you're not only the person in the house, they are too. So you want to make sure that not only you're comfortable, but your parent, your spouse, or your roommate, whoever it is also comfortable with you getting this reptile and on board with it. Because if they're not, then that can lead to some issues. So always doing your research, doing the education for the people. They may not have to be fully comfortable and on board with it, but they couldn't put up with it. That's kind of what you want as a starting ground. And like I said, it could be a gateway for them too, where they kind of realize like, oh, this isn't really all that bad and I'm kind of interested too. And that can lead to other things down the line that could be sparking their interest too, which would be really cool, honestly. Now, like I said too, for example, Eddie, my Burmese python, I had to make sure I was able to commit for a snake that's going to be bigger than me. It's going to be a 9+ foot snake. So that was something I wasn't able to obtain at the time where I was living before, and it just wasn't a right stage of my life. So it's one of those things where sometimes you just need to practice patience. You need to not bite off more than you can chew, because that's going to not only make you suffer in the end, it's also going to make the animal suffer too. And that's how animals wind up in shelters and kind of have all these issues. Now, I'm not saying every animal that goes to a shelter has that issue. There could be a whole bunch of different life occurrences that could cause issues, and that's something that you also want to make sure you know about too. Is, for example, if you're a younger person, you also want to make sure, like, if I'm getting into a reptile, it is a lifelong commitment. So these animals can live 12 plus years. For example, ball pythons, they can live 20 plus years. Tortoises, they can live 50 plus years, hundreds of years some. And it's one of those things where if you're getting into this, if you're going to college or anything like that, it may be something that you want to know, hey, can I take care of this? Do I have a family member that can take care of this? Do I have a friend that's able to take care of this if I'm gone or anything like that? If I'm traveling or if I have to go to school, anything. It's one of those things where you need to have a backup plan. And I think that's so crucial in this day and age, especially since we're always on the go, we're always traveling, we're always doing things. I think we do have to have a backup plan so we make sure that these animals take the proper care that they need. So making sure you're able to take on the commitment of a reptile, that is something that's going to be crucial. So like I said, it could be 12 years, it could be 50 plus years. You want to make sure that you have the capability to take on that commitment. Like I said, life does happen, things do happen, but having a backup plan just in case if something does happen, that's always important too. So make sure you think of that. But in general, I would say the first things that come to mind when I'm talking to someone about getting into reptiles or anything like that, those are the things that come to my mind. So if you can keep those things in mind when you're doing your research, and really put some time into doing your research, and really put some time into thinking about before you even get the reptile, is this something I want to do? And I would say too, like, really think about it for a couple weeks even, and maybe even a month or two, thinking about, all right, is this something I really want to get into or anything like that before you actually do it. Because trust me, I think it's better for you to find out early if this is something for you, rather than finding out later that when you do have the animal, this isn't something for me, and then you have to figure out, not only did you waste a lot of money into buying the setup and buying the animal and everything like that, but you also have to go into finding a new home for the animal, not throwing the animal outside and kind of making it fend for itself. Never do that. Always make sure you look into finding somewhere, if you do need to rehome an animal, a proper way to rehome an animal, and never ever throwing it outside. So make sure you also do that as well too. And last year too, I actually did go to Herps Alive, which is a reptile rescue, and I did do a whole collab down there. And I think I'm going to put a link up above to that video, so that way you guys can kind of see how it runs in terms of a reptile rescue and what it takes to run a reptile rescue for improper cared animals, or animals that just weren't a right fit for a person, or unfortunate situations where they can no longer keep or maintain an animal. So I think that's definitely a video that I want you guys to see too. I think it goes perfectly hand in hand with this, especially on this topic of if you're getting into reptiles. So make sure you check out that link too. Thank you guys again for watching today's videos. Let me know if you guys have any questions about reptile keeping or anything like that down below. Like I said, this video kind of sprung up a whole bunch of different videos that I kind of want to add into this. And like I said, leave some comments down below. Let me know what you guys think of this video, and if you guys have any questions, comments, or suggestions down below, I would love to hear those. And if you guys could do me a couple favors, if you could like this video and subscribe to my channel, I would greatly appreciate it. As well as if you could hit that notification bell so you know when I upload. Thank you guys so much again for watching today's video, and until next time, I will see you guys soon.